There are many unique techniques in the Jujutsu Kaisen world, but the domain expansions are by far the strongest ones. These barrier techniques are considered to be the pinnacle of Jujutsu, and only the most skilled sorcerers can perform them. Currently in the show, there are 12 different domains, and in this video, we'll be explaining and ranking each one. For example, Jogo's domain expansion is called Coffin of the Iron Mountain, which fits his appearance and curse technique quite well. This domain looks pretty much like an active volcano, with the environment so hot that an average sorcerer would die in seconds. With this domain, Jogo utilizes a guaranteed hit to attack his opponents with molten rocks. This pretty much means that Jogo's attack will always hit his target, no matter what. Although this domain seems incredibly powerful, we never got to see its full potential, as it was quickly suppressed by Gojo in his domain. And later on in Jogo's battle against Sukuna, he didn't even bother to activate it since he knew it would just be suppressed again by Sukuna's domain. All in all, Coffin of the Iron Mountain is a really strong domain expansion, and if Jogo's opponents weren't the two strongest guys in the whole series, I'm sure he would show us its full power. This was only the first out of 12 insane domains we'll cover in this video, and let's continue with Chimera Shadow Garden. Chimera Shadow Garden is cast by Megumi Fushiguro and is the only incomplete domain on this list. We'll talk about what that means a bit later. As the domain extends, it entirely floods the whole area with shadows, which goes perfectly with Megumi's curse technique, the 10 shadows. It's really dark inside the domain, and there's a strange structure that resembles the spinal bone with nerves. Casting this domain dramatically amplifies Megumi's 10 shadows technique by 120%, and also allows him to create clones of himself from the shadows. Another feature of this domain is that Megumi's opponents have to constantly reinforce their footing with cursed energy, otherwise they'll be sucked in. Falling into shadow is like falling into an abyss. There's no oxygen or resistance, making the target fall indefinitely. Now, since Megumi's domain is still incomplete, it doesn't have the sure hit effect other domains do. Moreover, it also lacks a barrier, as Megumi's skill level is not high enough to produce effective barriers and close his domain. However, the most interesting thing about this incomplete domain is this bone we mentioned earlier, as it may hide one big secret. Currently, these look like two bones of the vertebrae, and this is why a lot of fans believe that this bone will keep expanding as Megumi becomes stronger and eventually grow into some kind of creature. This is only a theory for now, but you have to admit that it would be so cool if it actually happened. Anyway, although this domain seems pretty strong, it has one huge weakness. You see, Megumi is able to store stuff in his shadows, like weapons and shikigamis, but he must bear their weight. So if Megumi's opponent manages to drop heavy objects into the shadows, it would quickly crush him. Due to this, I think B tier is a fitting place for it. But domains don't always have to be this complicated in order to be deadly, as we saw with Yorozu's domain called Threefold Affliction. This domain is pretty much an empty space, with some insect-like appendages floating within. But what does it do? Well, inside it, all of the objects Yorozu creates using her curse techniques are guaranteed to hit her target, which is especially deadly when paired with Yorozu's ultimate technique, Perfect Sphere. As the name suggests, this is, well, it's a perfect sphere, which generates infinite pressure and is pretty much impossible to counter. Using the combination of her domain and sphere, she can one-shot almost any enemy, no matter how strong they are. Now, I did say almost, as Sukuna managed to counter the domain and cut the sphere using Mahoraga. I mean, of course he did, but if anyone else was trapped inside it, it's more or less game over for them. And we can't talk about domain expansions without mentioning the strongest sorcerer in the current era, Gojo Satoru, and his insane unlimited void. As soon as this domain is cast, Gojo's targets are sent to an empty, space-like environment. There, Gojo can use his limitless technique to feed his targets with infinite knowledge, flooding their brains with raw information to the point they can no longer move or process what's happening. Basically, the target can feel everything and nothing at the same time. In addition to completely stunning opponents, this domain can also kill anyone if they stay in it for long enough. Even Nanami mentions how powerful Gojo's technique is, as it's a sure kill once the target is trapped by it. So how long does it take for someone to die in Gojo's domain? Well, for normal humans, that number is a bit over 0.2 seconds, and for stronger curses, it's probably around a minute, although it was never specifically mentioned. Of course, Gojo is not affected by the unlimited void, and whoever he's holding or touching will also be safe from it. He can also very accurately control the time the domain will be open for, strengthen the domain's barriers to protect it from outside attacks, and even decrease its size to that of a basketball. But this is most likely because of Gojo's skill and has nothing to do with an actual domain. It goes without saying that the unlimited void goes into the S tier. However, not all domains send you to a scary-looking environment. Some of them literally send you to a relaxing, sunny beach. Dagon's Horizon of the Captivating Skanda is one of the first domains we saw in the series, and it's the place Kenjaku and the Curses used to relax during Season 1. But as calming as it may seem, this domain can be deadly if Dagon wants it to be. Similar to other domains, the Horizon of the Captivating Skanda has the sure hit effect and uses many different Shikigamis Dagon created to attack the opponents. The interesting thing about this domain is that these Shikigamis appear very suddenly, as they practically don't exist till they hit the target. This makes it really hard to block these attacks, and once the Shikigami hits the target, they devour the flesh immediately. Now, an average sorcerer will not be able to handle the Shikigamis at all due to their incredible speed. However, a higher grade sorcerer can handle it. We've seen this when Naobito, a special grade 1 sorcerer, was able to block incoming attacks using his techniques, and later on, Toji made a joke out of the domain, blocking every single attack and ultimately defeating Dagon. So while this domain is quite powerful, it's nowhere close to the strength of the domains we're going to talk about soon. Self-embodiment of perfection. Self-embodiment of perfection is Mahito's domain and is one of the most unique domains in the whole series. Mahito deploys the domain by opening his mouth, showing tiny hands inside which then conjure specific hand seals. The environment inside is filled with darkness and the hands formed are gripped together like a flower. Okay, that's pretty scary, but what does it do? Well, Mahito's curse technique allows him to reshape the soul of anyone he touches, and in his domain, Mahito is guaranteed to touch his target. However, although this sounds like a great thing for Mahito, it can seriously backfire. You see, when this domain is cast, Mahito doesn't have a choice anymore about who he wants to touch, and has to touch everyone inside it. This is why when Yuji broke the barrier and entered the domain, Mahito was forced to touch his and Sukuna's soul, which didn't end really well for him. Later on in the story, Mahito got much better at expanding his domain, being able to cast it only for 0.2 seconds, same as Gojo. Now, although getting stuck in Mahito's domain pretty much means certain death, there are some ways to counter it. For example, if the user is skilled enough like Mekamaru was, they can protect themselves from Mahito's idle transfiguration by using Simple Domain, which acts as a barrier to protect the target from the domain's effect. There are still 6 incredible domains left to cover, and 2 of them are actually S-tier domains. Time Cell Moon Palace. Aside from being really complicated, this domain also gets an award for having by far the most disturbing design. Anyway, the user of this domain is Naoya Zenin, the youngest son of Naobito. As he expands his domain, a dark, empty space immediately appears, and at the center is a path made of flesh that leads to a huge eye which sees everything. The targets inside the domain are immediately injected with films of animation in their net. Pretty weird, I know, but bear with me. Afterward, in order to move inside the domain, the target must abide by the domain's 24 FPS rule. But what does that mean? Well, according to the 24 FPS rule, the target cannot walk normally from point A to point B and instead has to move in frames. To better explain this, imagine you have to cover a distance of 24 meters. You would normally walk or run to that spot without any delay. However, if you do that in Naoya's domain, you will surely regret it. So in order to avoid the domain's punishment, you have to actually hop across in 1 meter chunks. Stop at each spot for precisely 1/24th of a second, and then hop to the next meter, and so on. In short, you need to move like an anime animation, frame by frame. Those who don't understand the 24 FPS rule mostly end up making the wrong movement without realizing it. When this happens, the targets can suffer numerous injuries on their bodies, get frozen for 1 second, or if they try to force a movement against the rules, their limbs will get cut off. As you can imagine, it's near impossible to dodge attacks in this domain, as you have to be mindful of your movements at all times, and even one wrong step or off timing can be devastating. The only reason Naoya lost at the end was because he was unable to track Maki's movements due to her having no cursed energy. But if it was anyone else trapped inside it, they would have almost 0% chance of surviving. But let's move from a complicated domain to a rather simple one. The Graveyard Domain, cast by the Smallpox deity. Now, although this domain is simple, it shouldn't be underestimated, as it can kill its target within 3 seconds. The Smallpox deity uses certain hand signs to activate this domain, and as soon as it's activated, it traps the target inside a coffin. Afterward, the curse drops a massive gravestone on top of the coffin, dealing considerable damage to the target inside and burying them underground. Once the target is underground, the cursed spirit counts to 3, and within 3 seconds, the target has to break out of the gravestone, otherwise, they'll die. However, if the target manages to free themselves, they're still not in the clear, as they'll immediately get trapped again, repeating the whole process. Overall, the Graveyard Domain is a pretty annoying one, but considering the low intelligence level of the special grade curse casting it, it wasn't that hard for Mei Mei and Uyui to distract it and eventually escape the domain. Womb Profusion. Kenjaku is the main villain of the Jujutsu Kaisen and is an incredibly strong character who has been preparing his plan for ages. His domain expansion also doesn't disappoint as it has one divine ability not even Gojo's domain has. As soon as Womb Profusion is cast, a bunch of cursed spirits' faces merge together to form a creepy looking tower. Although we know very little about this domain, it seems that as soon as a target gets close to the tower, they get hit by a massive force that is as powerful as Geto's maximum Uzumaki, which is, well, pretty damn powerful. The first time we saw Kenjaku's domain was in a battle against Yuki, and although it was only open for less than 10 seconds, it was enough to mortally injure Yuki, a special grade sorcerer, and almost kill her. It's not fully clear exactly what strikes the targets inside Kenjaku's domain, but it seems that they're struck by gravity itself, which would make sense considering Kenjaku's gravity abilities. But what makes this domain truly powerful is the fact that it doesn't have any barriers around it and instead covers the whole area around Kenjaku. It's also important to mention that simple domains like the one Mekamaru used to counter Mahito don't work in this domain and are quickly dispelled, leaving the target completely defenseless. Considering that Kenjaku managed to defeat a special grade sorcerer within a few seconds of casting Womb Profusion, it obviously deserves to go into S tier. Okay, all the domains so far were about increasing the strength and power of the characters. I mean, isn't that the whole point? Well, yeah, but there is one domain that does none of that, and it's called Deadly Sentencing. This domain is cast by Hiromi Higurama and looks a lot like a courtroom. Although the domain is non-lethal, it's much more detailed compared to other domains. Inside it, Hiromi and the target stand across each other and play the roles of the prosecutor and defendant. They pretty much undergo a trial, and every form of violence is completely restricted inside the domain. Therefore, instead of having a sure hit attack like other domains, Deadly Sentencing forces the target inside to follow Hiromi's rules. Now, as soon as the domain is cast, the trial starts, and a Shikigami called Judgeman appears, acting as the judge. He immediately shares the charges against the defendant, which is usually the crime they committed in the past. For example, in Yuji's case, he was accused of playing slot machines while being underage. The defendant then has to prove themselves innocent and can even lie if they want to. The only thing they have to do is convince the judgeman that they're innocent. Yuji did this by saying that he only used the toilet in the gambling house and didn't play any betting games in there. After this is done, Higurama has one chance to prove that the defendant is lying, and he can do this with the help of evidence Judgeman gives him. Once both Higurama and the defendant are done explaining, the Judgeman gives the final verdict. If the defendant is guilty, the most common sentence is confiscation, which stops them from using their curse technique for the rest of the fight. However, the defendant can also be charged with a death sentence, and if that happens, Hiromi gets the executioner's sword, which can kill the target in a single cut. Overall, it's a pretty complex domain, but considering how it doesn't really attempt to kill the target and usually only restricts them in some way, I can't place it any higher than C tier. Before we cover the absolutely strongest domain on this list, let's first cover the most unique one. It's called the Idle Death Gamble, and it's cast by Kenji Hakari, a third-year student at Tokyo Jujutsu High. This domain basically takes inspiration from a popular Japanese arcade game called Pachinko, and the overall theme of the domain is based on a romance manga series called Private Pure Love Train. To simplify it, Hakari's domain expansion is pretty much a slot game with manga characters. This is the only domain in the series that doesn't grant the user any immediate advantages. Instead, it heavily relies on luck, and Hakari has to hit the jackpot in order to get a massive power-up. Before we explain what this power-up is, let's first see how this jackpot thing even works. You see, in Hakari's domain, there's only a 1 in 239 chance of hitting the jackpot. Based on this, you may think that Hakari's domain is not that powerful, as it's really hard to get a power-up, but you're forgetting one important thing. Hakari is extremely lucky, even to the point that the domain seems rigged in his favor. Also, the important thing to mention is that the more jackpots Hakari hits, the higher the chance he has of hitting another jackpot, meaning that once he starts his winning streak, his opponent is practically screwed. So what happens to Hakari when he hits the jackpot? Well, first of all, he gets the unlimited amount of cursed energy, and in addition to that, all of the damage he suffers is immediately healed, making him unstoppable. These powered boosts last for exactly 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and during that time, a theme song from Private Pure Love Train is playing. The only thing more interesting than this domain is Hakari's dance after he hits the jackpot. That alone makes his domain worthy of A tier. And now let's cover the domain you've all been waiting for, Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine. Considering Sukuna's strength, it goes without saying that this is one of the strongest domains in the entire Jujutsu Kaisen. Malevolent Shrine looks pretty much like a regular Buddhist shrine, but has been distorted to look more demonic and evil, with a giant mouth at the entrance and several bull-shaped skulls. Similar to other domains, Malevolent Shrine has a guaranteed hit effect, making Sukuna's techniques, Cleave and Dismantle, always hit their target. Once the domain is open, these two techniques repeatedly slash anyone inside until nothing remains except Sukuna himself. Same as Kenjaku's domain, Malevolent Shrine doesn't have barriers, meaning everyone in Sukuna's proximity is affected. But if there aren't any barriers, doesn't that mean that Sukuna's opponents can just escape? Well, yeah, but it's not that simple, as Sukuna can extend his domain up to 200 meters, making it pretty much impossible for anyone to leave without being killed first. Since the domain doesn't have any barriers, it also means that it can't be destroyed from the outside. So how does someone counter this domain? Well, it's pretty much impossible. In theory, the only way would be to damage Sukuna enough to the point that he's unable to maintain it. And yeah, nobody in the show is strong enough to do that. But if you ever wondered how Sukuna became such a powerful sorcerer and why no one will ever be as strong as him, click on this video next where we explain all Sukuna's powers in Jujutsu Kaisen.